The road had forgotten the sound of footsteps long before he arrived. Snow lay over it like a quiet apology, softening every sharp edge the world had left behind. Even the wind seemed to move carefully here, as if afraid to disturb whatever grief had settled into the earth. Rowan Hale walked through it without urgency, his coat pulled tight, his breath rising in thin ghosts that vanished before they could become anything real. He had learned to walk like that, without leaving much behind. Briar Hollow sat somewhere ahead, though he hadn't decided if he meant to enter it. Towns came with questions, and questions came with answers he no longer carried. Still, the road led there, and he followed it out of habit more than hope. That was when she stepped into his path. At first, she was only a shape against the white, a flicker of movement where nothing should have moved. Rowan slowed, his instincts waking before his thoughts could catch up. The dog stood still once he saw her clearly, her frame too thin for winter, her fur dulled by hunger and weather. A German shepherd, though barely holding onto the strength that name once implied. Her ribs showed through her coat, like fragile branches beneath snow. Rowan didn't reach for her. He didn't speak. He had seen enough animals in war zones to know that desperation could turn anything into danger. He simply shifted his weight and stepped to the side, intending to pass her without incident. She moved with him. Not quickly, not aggressively, just enough to remain in his path. He frowned, the expression unfamiliar on his face. "Go on," he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. It sounded strange in the open air, like a tool he no longer knew how to handle. The dog didn't flinch. She didn't bark. She only watched him, her eyes steady in a way that unsettled him more than any growl could have. He tried again, stepping wider this time. Again, she followed, placing herself between him and whatever lay ahead. Rowan exhaled slowly, a thread of irritation tightening in his chest. "I don't have anything for you," he said, though the truth was he had enough in his pack to spare. That wasn't the point. Feeding her would mean staying, and staying meant noticing, and noticing meant remembering things he had spent months trying to forget. The dog lowered her head slightly, not in submission, but in something closer to insistence. Then she turned, took a few unsteady steps away, and glanced back at him. It wasn't the look of an animal begging for scraps. It was the look of something asking to be followed. Rowan stood there longer than he intended, the silence pressing in around him. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint scent, damp wood, cold earth, something fragile hidden beneath it. He felt it stir an old instinct, one he had buried beneath years of deliberate distance. He shook his head once, as if that might clear it. "Not my problem," he said under his breath, and started forward again. The dog returned immediately, placing herself in front of him once more. This time, she didn't just stand. She trembled. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, but Rowan saw it. The way her legs strained to hold her weight, the way her breath came shallow and uneven. She wasn't blocking him out of defiance. She was holding herself together for something that mattered more than her own strength. Rowan's jaw tightened. He had seen that kind of resolve before, in places where survival came at a cost most people couldn't name. It wasn't loud. It didn't ask for recognition. It simply endured, quietly, until there was nothing left to give. The dog turned again, slower this time, and began to walk. After a few steps, she stopped and looked back. Rowan didn't move. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, with a faint curse that disappeared into the wind, he followed. The path she led him down wasn't really a path at all, just a narrow break between trees where the snow had settled unevenly. Branches reached low, heavy with frost, brushing against his shoulders as he passed. The air grew colder, sharper, as though the world here had been left untouched by whatever warmth still existed elsewhere. The dog moved ahead of him, her pace uneven but determined. She paused often, waiting, as if she understood that losing him now would mean losing something she could not afford to lose. Rowan kept his distance, his eyes scanning their surroundings out of habit. Old instincts never truly left. They only changed the way they spoke. He noted the silence, the absence of birds, the way the trees seemed to lean inward, closing them off from the rest of the world. "Where are you taking me?" he asked quietly, though he didn't expect an answer. The dog only continued. They came upon it almost by accident, a collapsed wooden structure half buried beneath snow, its roof sagging under the weight of the storm that had passed days before. It might once have been a shed or a shelter, but now it looked like something the world had decided to forget. The dog stopped at its edge. She didn't go inside immediately. Instead, she looked at Rowan once more, her gaze holding his with a quiet urgency that left no room for misunderstanding. Then she disappeared into the darkness beneath the broken roof. Rowan hesitated. Something in his chest shifted. Not quite fear, not quite reluctance, something older, something he had learned to ignore because it led to places he couldn't always survive. He stepped forward anyway. The cold inside the structure felt different, heavier somehow, as if it had settled there and refused to leave. The scent he had noticed earlier grew stronger. Damp wood, yes, but beneath it something softer, weaker, alive. It took his eyes a moment to adjust. Then he saw them, for small shapes huddled together in a shallow hollow beneath a fallen beam, their bodies barely moving, their breaths so faint they seemed like a trick of the light. Puppies, no more than a few weeks old, their fur matted, their limbs tucked tightly against themselves, as if trying to hold on to whatever warmth remained. One of them let out a sound, thin, fragile, almost too small to exist. Rowan stopped where he stood. For a long moment, he didn't move. The dog, Lyra, though he did not yet know her name, stepped past him and lay down beside them, curling her body around their trembling forms. She didn't look at him now. Her focus had shifted entirely, her presence becoming something steady, something protective. She had brought him here, not for herself, for them. Rowan felt it then, sharp and unwelcome, the memory of another moment, another place where something small had depended on him, where the outcome had not been something he could carry without breaking. The past rose quietly, without permission, threading itself through the present until the two became impossible to separate. He took a step back. "This isn't," he began, though the sentence never found its end. He knew what this was. It was a choice, and choices had consequences. He wasn't sure he could survive again. Lyra shifted slightly, adjusting her body to shield the puppies from a draft that slipped through the broken wall. One of them nudged closer to her, its tiny form pressing into the only warmth it knew. Rowan watched, his breath slowing, his thoughts narrowing to the space in front of him. He could leave. The road was still there, waiting, offering him the same quiet emptiness he had grown used to. No expectations, no risks, no reminders of what happened when things didn't go the way they were supposed to. Or he could stay. He closed his eyes briefly, the darkness behind him filled with things he had tried not to see. When he opened them again, the scene hadn't changed. It rarely did. With a low exhale, he set his pack down. The movement felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than just supplies. He crouched slowly, careful not to startle the dog, though she showed no sign of fear. Her gaze flicked to him once, steady and searching, before returning to the small lives she guarded. "I don't do this," Rowan murmured, though the words sounded less certain now. He reached into his pack, pulling out a worn blanket and shaking it free of snow. His hands moved with a familiarity he hadn't expected, folding the fabric around the puppies, creating a barrier between them and the cold that had nearly taken everything from them. One of them stirred, its tiny head lifting weakly before settling again. Rowan swallowed, the motion tight in his throat. He gathered what broken wood he could find, arranging it into a small pile, his fingers stiff but determined. The match struck with a soft, decisive sound, the flame flickering to life before catching, growing slowly into something that pushed back against the cold. The light changed the space. It softened it, gave it shape, turned it from something abandoned into something that might still hold a future. Lyra watched him now, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. There was no fear in them, no hesitation, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if she had known all along that he would not walk away. Rowan sat back on his heels, the warmth of the fire brushing against his face. He hadn't realized how cold he had been until that moment, how much of it had settled into places that had nothing to do with the weather. "You're stubborn," he said softly, glancing at the dog. She didn't respond, but the faint shift of her head felt like agreement. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the broken edges of the structure, reminding him how fragile this place was, how easily it could be lost to the next storm. He looked at the puppies, then at Lyra, then at the small fire that struggled to hold its ground against the cold. The road felt very far away now. Night began to fall slowly, the light fading into shades of blue and gray that blurred the edges of the world. Rowan adjusted the blanket once more, ensuring it held, his movements careful, deliberate. Lyra shifted closer to him. It was a small movement, almost accidental, but her head came to rest lightly against his knee. The contact was brief at first, tentative, as if testing something unspoken. Rowan froze. For a moment, he considered pulling away, returning to the distance that had kept him safe for so long. Instead, he stayed. The weight of her head was slight, but it carried something he hadn't felt in a long time. Trust, given freely, without question, without expectation of return. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the road, the trees, the world beyond this fragile shelter. Inside, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Rowan Hale did not feel entirely alone. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped in quietly, like warmth remembering its way back into the world. Rowan woke to the faint crackle of dying embers and the soft, uneven breathing of the small lives gathered near him. For a moment, he did not move. The stillness felt fragile, as though any sudden motion might disturb whatever delicate balance had formed in the night. Lyra was awake. He knew it without looking. There was a steadiness in the air now, a quiet vigilance that did not belong to sleep. When he finally turned his head, he found her watching him, not with suspicion, but with something deeper, something settled. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice low enough not to startle the puppies. The words were meant for himself as much as for her. He pushed himself upright, his joints stiff from the cold and the unfamiliar act of staying in one place. The fire had nearly gone out, its glow reduced to faint pulses beneath a thin layer of ash. Rowan reached for the remaining wood, feeding the embers with careful patience until a small flame returned, hesitant at first, then steady. The puppies stirred at the renewed warmth. One of them, smaller than the others, lifted its head with visible effort, its eyes barely open, its body trembling as though it were uncertain of its place in the world. Rowan watched it for a long moment, then extended a hand, slow and deliberate. It did not shy away. Its tiny nose brushed against his fingers. The contact, so light it almost didn't register. Yet it was enough. Something within him shifted again, not sharply this time, but like ice softening at its edges. "You're a stubborn one," he said quietly, more to himself than to the fragile creature before him. Lyra adjusted her position, giving the puppy space, without ever fully leaving them unguarded. Her gaze followed Rowan's movements, not with tension, but with a calm awareness that spoke of trust earned in increments too small to measure. Rowan reached for his pack, pulling out what little food remained. He broke it into pieces, placing them within Lyra's reach. She hesitated only briefly before eating, her hunger evident but controlled, as if she refused to take more than she needed. He noticed that. He noticed everything now. By midday, the sky had cleared, revealing a pale stretch of blue that did little to warm the air. Rowan stepped outside, the cold biting at his skin with renewed insistence. He scanned the treeline, his instincts mapping the space, measuring distances, noting the way the wind moved through the branches. The structure would not hold another storm. He knew it with a certainty that left no room for argument. When he returned inside, Lyra lifted her head slightly, her attention sharpening as if she sensed a change in him. "We can't stay here," he said, though the words felt heavier than they should have. The puppies slept, unaware of the decision forming above them. Rowan crouched beside them, adjusting the blanket, ensuring it covered every inch of fragile warmth he could preserve. He lingered there longer than necessary. Then he stood. The walk to Briar Hollow felt different now. The road had not changed, nor had the snow that covered it. Yet Rowan carried something with him this time, a quiet urgency that pushed against the edges of his usual detachment. The town came into view gradually, its buildings clustered together like something seeking comfort in its own presence. Smoke rose from chimneys, thin and wavering, a sign of life that felt distant from the silence he had left behind. As he stepped onto the main path, Conversations faltered. Eyes turned. Rowan kept his gaze forward, ignoring the weight of their attention. He had learned long ago that people spoke more freely when they believed they were not being heard. He's back. Thought he'd moved on. Should've. The words drifted around him, carried on voices that did not bother to lower themselves. Rowan neither slowed nor quickened his pace. He had no interest in correcting them. Sheriff Calder Boone stood near the center of town, his posture rigid, his expression set in the kind of certainty that rarely made room for anything new. His eyes narrowed slightly as Rowan approached. "You've been out past the ridge," Boone said, not as a question but as an accusation. Rowan stopped a few feet away. "I have." Boone's gaze sharpened. "Storm's coming in again. That area won't hold. You know that." "I do." "Then whatever you've got out there." Boone paused, his mouth tightening. "Leave it. Nature takes what it takes." Rowan held his gaze, unflinching. "Not this time." A murmur passed through the small crowd that had begun to gather. Boone exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "You don't get to decide that. You think you can outlast winter? You think you're stronger than it." Rowan didn't answer immediately. His silence stretched just long enough to make the question feel unnecessary. "I'm not stronger than anything," he said finally, "but I'm not walking away." Boone studied him for a moment, as if trying to determine whether this was stubbornness or something more dangerous. Whatever he found did not satisfy him. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said flatly. "Maybe," Rowan replied. The simplicity of it left no room for argument. Boone shook his head once, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Don't expect anyone to come looking." "I won't." Rowan turned before the conversation could continue, his purpose already pulling him forward. He gathered what supplies he could, blankets, wood, a small lantern, ignoring the looks that followed him. Most were skeptical, some dismissive, a few quietly curious. Only one held something else. Mara Vance stood near the edge of the street, her hands folded loosely in front of her, her expression unreadable at first glance. When Rowan passed her, she stepped forward, her movement unhurried. "You're carrying more than supplies," she said softly. Rowan paused, glancing at her. Her eyes were steady, observant in a way that did not feel intrusive. She did not ask questions. She did not demand explanations. She simply waited. "There are lives out there," Rowan said after a moment. Mara nodded once, as if that were enough. She reached into the basket at her side, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For warmth," she said, offering it to him, "and for strength, when it feels like it's leaving you." Rowan accepted it without comment, though his grip lingered slightly longer than necessary. "Some things return to us," Mara added quietly, "when we choose not to abandon what still needs us." He met her gaze briefly, then inclined his head in a gesture that felt unfamiliar but not unwelcome. When he left the town, the sky had already begun to shift. Clouds gathered in slow, deliberate formations, their weight pressing down on the horizon. The air carried a tension that spoke of something approaching, something inevitable. By the time Rowan reached the shelter, the wind had begun to rise. Lyra met him at the entrance, her posture alert, but not alarmed. The puppies stirred at his return, their small bodies responding to the subtle change in the air. "We don't have much time," he said, setting his supplies down. The first gust hit moments later, rattling the weakened structure, sending a fine cascade of snow drifting through the cracks. Rowan moved quickly, reinforcing what he could, securing the blanket more tightly around the puppies, feeding the fire until it burned brighter, stronger. Lyra stayed close, her movements precise, her focus unwavering. The storm arrived fully, without warning. Wind tore through the trees with a force that felt almost deliberate, as if it had chosen this place, this moment, to test what remained. Snow followed, thick and relentless, filling every space it could find, pressing against the fragile walls of the shelter. The structure groaned. Rowan braced himself against one of the beams, his muscles straining as he fought to hold it in place. The wood creaked beneath the pressure, its resistance fading with each passing second. "This won't hold," he muttered. Another gust slammed into the side, stronger than the last. The beam shifted. Then it gave way. The collapse was sudden, violent in its quiet destruction. Wood splintered, snow surged inward, and the small hollow that had sheltered life moments before became a trap of debris and cold. Rowan was already moving. "Lyra," he called, his voice cutting through the chaos. She was there, digging frantically at the fallen wood, her movements driven by something beyond instinct. Rowan joined her, his hands tearing at the frozen debris, ignoring the sharp edges that cut into his skin. "Hold on," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to anymore. He found one of the puppies first, its body limp but still warm. He pulled it free, placing it carefully to the side, where the blanket still offered some protection. Another followed, then another, each one a fragile victory, each one a reminder of how easily it could have been otherwise. The last was buried deeper. Rowan's breath came harder now, his strength fading as the cold pressed in from every direction, his fingers numbed, his movements slowing despite his efforts to push beyond it. "I'm not losing you," he said, his voice breaking in a way he had not allowed in years. "Not again." The words came from somewhere deeper than thought, drawn out by a memory he could no longer keep contained. He forced his hands deeper into the debris, ignoring the pain, the cold, the weight of everything that told him to stop. Then he felt it, a faint movement. He pulled harder, the wood resisting for a moment before giving way just enough for him to reach the small, trembling form beneath it. The puppy barely stirred as he lifted it free, but it breathed. Rowan let out a sound that was not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something in between, something raw and unguarded. Lyra pressed close to him, her body a steady presence against the storm. She did not panic. She did not falter. She simply remained, as she had from the beginning. Together, they gathered what remained. The storm raged on, but its edge had dulled, its fury spent against the quiet persistence that refused to yield. By the time dawn found them, the world had changed again. The sky cleared slowly, light spilling over the snow in soft, deliberate strokes. The wreckage of the shelter lay scattered, half buried, a reminder of how close everything had come to ending. Rowan sat in the midst of it, the puppies gathered against him, wrapped in what warmth he could still provide. His body ached, his hands were torn and bleeding, but his grip remained steady. Lyra lay beside him, her breathing calm, her presence unwavering. All four puppies stirred, all four lived. For a long moment, Rowan did nothing but watch them. Then he exhaled, the sound carrying something he had not felt in years, not relief alone, but something quieter, something that settled into the spaces he had long kept empty. Footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then more certain. Rowan looked up to see figures emerging from the edge of the trees, their forms familiar even at a distance. The town had come, drawn by the storm, by curiosity, by something they could not quite name. Sheriff Boone stood at the front, his expression unreadable as his gaze moved from the wreckage to the man seated within it, surrounded by the lives he had refused to abandon. For once, he did not speak immediately. Mara stood just behind him, her eyes soft as they took in the scene. Rowan held their gaze briefly, then looked back at the puppies, his attention returning to where it belonged. The road still existed. It always would. But for the first time, it did not feel like the only direction he could take. Somewhere beneath the weight of winter, something had shifted, and it was not going back.